at it again, and we have one with Matt Walsh. Let's dive in.
So I'd like to say that I'm actually a part of that organization that was going to come and try and derail you tonight. I didn't hear a single thing, though, that constituted an attack on queer or trans lives or an attack on me personally. So I don't know what they were on about there. Moreover, everything that you have said on gender identity, gender expression, John Money, pronoun usage, what else? The sex gender distinction, you are 100% correct.
Wow.
You are 100% correct. I don't know if you've ever heard that from a trans person before. I identify as a trans woman. You are 100% correct on there. And it is an absolute travesty that the trans community bases everything on such vacuous concepts. My thing is, though, is I don't agree with your conclusion. I don't agree with it. But more so, the reason why I don't is less a matter of argumentation and more so a matter of method. You've stated time and time again that your approach to this is to try and keep things simple and uncomplicated, as in you don't try and engage with the nuance of the position of trans people. But that's exactly how my org treats you. They don't think that your arguments are worth looking at because they cast you as a transphobe. I did otherwise, and I looked, I'm like, yeah, no, this guy's absolutely correct on all these things.
So which conclusion are you? You said you disagree with my conclusions.
Well, it's the conclusion that of the model that you're postulating of gender, of that it's just this, you have.
It sounds like he's saying that he doesn't agree with Matt Walsh that gender is a very simple and straightforward thing. I'm gonna call it a guy. It looks like a guy, so I'm just gonna say guy. I don't know the person's name, so I'm gonna say guy. It looks like this gentleman here, this guy here, thinks that gender is a very layered and complex thing, and that is what he is disagreeing with Matt Walsh about. It's kind of what I extrapolated from this, but let's listen on and see if he
model that you're postulating of gender, of that it's just this, you have man, woman, they're biologically contingent. My sort of question is, do you think that defaulting to simplicity, if this is the most dire issue of the age, which is something else that I agree with you on, do you really think that a method of simply recoursing to the most simplistic matter of approach is what we should be doing here?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah, I do. Because, I mean, I appreciate, I appreciate everything that you said, and I appreciate your attitude. I very rarely encounter your attitude from that side of the ideological aisle. So I appreciate that. But yeah, I do think that.
Before we dive deeper, yeah. So salute to this guy. Salute to that guy there for not, shouting and screaming and yelling. But we are 2 minutes in, so we'll see. We'll see if it stays that way.
Making it simple is the right approach because, to my view, it is a very simple question. Now, if you want to get into the personal experiences of each individual and someone who is who's experiencing gender dysphoria and what do we do to treat that problem? Sure, there's all kinds of personal, subjective nuances and things like that. If my child came to me and said that they were confused about their identity, I wouldn't just say, get out of my face. I would want to sit down and talk to them. And that's when you get into, that becomes a sort of an interpersonal exchange. And so you get into some of those personal nuances and everything, and that's fine. But the underlying fact, the underlying reality is simple, that there are only males and females in the human race. There are no other categories. There is no third sex. It doesn't exist. Even though we hear about intersex people, an actual intersex person would be someone who has the reproductive capacities of both men and women, males and females. Such a person has never existed, ever. So what I see here is a binary system, and in that way, it's very simple, and I think that has to be our message. Yeah.
I agree with that.
I would still even say, respective to that even if from your standpoint, there's only this binary, there's two. There's complexities and nuances even within social navigation that still might be worth you looking into. I would also say that a lot of your facts also are off, respective to, for instance, the first sexual reassignment surgery actually happened in the 1920s. So that was before John Money. So it's not a case that
I didn't say his was the first.
What?
I didn't say his was the first. It was probably the first one done on a 2-year-old, but I said he was the one who invented. You started by saying you agree with everything that I said, and now we're going back and you disagree. I'm a little confused now.
My point is that if you have it to where you can get to a different conclusion from the same arguments, it means that there might be something deeper going on here that for people who are actually philosophers, not rhetoricians, need to be dealing with.
Okay, we got to move to the next question, but let me just ask you this so we can clarify where we are. Yeah. Do you agree that there are only males and females in the human race?
No.
Okay, so you definitely don't agree with my conclusion then at all.
No.
We actually are totally on opposite sides of this question, it turns out. Okay, so what are the other categories if not male and female?
We are going to be here all night if I have to doing that.
We're not, because there's none that you can list. So it's actually a very short conversation.
All right. Well, you're wanting to say that you have these other social categories, right? It's a question of, you're saying are, right? So the question here for me would be one of ontology, insofar as we're trying to posit that there is some kind of specificity, right? And you would look at something like intersex and say that this is like some kind of weird border case, right? It's a question of the kind of continuum that would allow for one to come into an embodiment that you would cast as male and female. I mean, something that's really interesting is you said that something like age is makes more sense to identify as. You at one point had, female genitalia when you were in utero. So you've passed through that, right? And what happens to intersex people is that there's just some kind of like different, there's a different of development that occurs there. So respective to us talking about these categories, it's not a case of there being this hardline thing. I mean, the reason why we also are not going to get anywhere here is because I actually would agree with you that something like woman is what would, in a technical sense, be called a floating signifier. So it doesn't have this like particular designatable meaning to it, right?
All right.
So that's why we're not going to go anywhere.
That's pretty clear. But I appreciate it. Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
I just want to make just two quick follow-ups on that. Is that one thing? I think that this is a tactic that you encounter on the left all the time when it comes to gender, which is to try to obscure it and make it sound complicated and to throw a lot of, these sort of abstract ideas into it. And from what I've discovered, and this conversation didn't change my view at all on that, is that that's the only tactic they have, right? Is to just try to make it seem complicated, but yet while also not offering any alternative answers at all. And the final thing on intersex, because maybe someone else will bring this up, just so we could get that question out of the way, because it always comes up. Number one, intersex, that category has nothing to do with trans, right? Trans man or trans woman is a biological male who identifies as a female. So even if I were to agree that intersex people are some sort of exception, that would do nothing to vindicate the trans man, because that's a different category. But as it turns out, intersex people are not an exception. These are people who suffer from a deformity, from a condition. Just like someone might be born with one arm rather than two. That does not negate or undermine the fact that human beings have two arms. But if someone is born with only one, then you know that something went wrong along the way. They ought to have had two, but they didn't because something went wrong.
Yep.
So a deformity or a sickness doesn't undermine the principle that we're dealing with.
Yeah. I know someone who actually only has one hand. Anyway, it didn't make her, it didn't change the fact that she was a girl or human. She was just a human that didn't have one hand. She had the other one, just one was missing. But I want to really dive into that gentleman asking the question, because honestly, it makes me happy to see something like that. It really does. Genuinely, it does. It makes me genuinely happy to have watched that and listened to that gentleman speak. That was amazing. And all of these videos and all of these encounters that we see online, on the internet, it's always yelling and screaming and name calling and, just getting absolutely nowhere. And yet, while he disagreed with Matt, he remained calm, respectful, even said thank you while walking away, and seemed 100% genuine. I would love to shake that gentleman's hand. Would love to shake that gentleman's hand. Sit down, have a conversation with him, because that is the type of person that I would want to talk to on things that I disagreed with. Not some of these other folks that just yell and scream and yada, yada, yada whenever you disagree. That's the type of person that I want to speak to. That person right there. So I think it's important that we acknowledge that gentleman right there, because that was amazing. Absolutely amazing. If I knew his Instagram, I'd shout it out right now. If anybody knows his Instagram, drop it in the comment section, please. If anybody knows what his Instagram handle is, but that was incredible, absolutely incredible. And I can only say that's a beautiful person right there. That is how us humans are supposed to communicate. That is how it's done. Disagree or not, that's how you do it. It is unfortunate a little bit that I even have to be happy about that, or I even have to applaud that. But regardless of that, I am happy and I will applaud that gentleman there, because that was great. But anyway, back to the actual conversation they were having. I agree with Matt. I think it is very simple, and that's not to say that trans people don't exist. It's not to say that trans people should be discriminated against. I've said that time and time again. Anybody discriminating against trans people is a horrible, terrible, no good, very bad person. And I mean actually discriminating against. Not a disagreement like they were having, but I mean actual discrimination. A trans person comes in, and applies for a job and they don't get it simply because they're trans. That's BS. A trans person, applies for an apartment and they get denied simply because they're trans. That is BS. You know what I mean? Situations that are actually phobic, right? That are actually that word. Okay. That's BS. And I think we can all agree across the board that is total BS. Nobody should be hated simply because they're trans or who they choose to love, gay, lesbian, whatever. That's BS. But even with that being said, I still have to agree with Matt. It's simple. It's not complex. The very few situations where it has, where we have gotten somewhat of an explanation, it's overly complicated. The super complex, not specific thing, just like what we heard right there. Do y'all agree? Let me know. And once again, I don't think it's hateful to say that. And the gentleman there agreed that that's not hateful. Just disagree. And the crazy part is he admitted that he was a part of a group that was supposed to come there and disrupt that entire event. So that's even more of an applause to that gentleman there, because he didn't follow the crowd. He displayed critical thinking skills. He said, you know what? I'm not going to listen to this group of individuals. I'm going to think for myself. I'm going to go research what Matt Walsh is saying. I'm going to go hear exactly what it is that he has to say before I formulate an opinion on him, because some other people said something about him. I am going to think for myself. And that is another thing that we should all applaud from that gentleman. He displayed some critical thinking skills. In a day and time where most people, well, not even most people, 99.9% of people are sheep and just follow the crowd, he said, you know what? I'm going to do something different. I cannot applaud that enough, how incredible that person is for that. Doesn't matter if we disagree. That's fine. We're going to disagree on a lot of stuff. Hell, a lot of us disagree on the type of phones we want. Doesn't make us enemies. Just means that we disagree. That's okay. That's fine. I'm fine with people disagreeing. I've been that same way forever. Disagreement is a beautiful thing. It's the reason why we all have options. Think about the number of types of cars, phones, clothes, hairstyles. You know what I mean? Disagreement has brought us a wide array of different things. So just because we disagree isn't, you know what I mean? It's not a bad thing. It's a beautiful thing. It's a wonderful thing. And we can't let it separate us and cause us to be mortal enemies, because we're not. And once again, we are all in the same boat together. And I'm glad that gentleman there understood that. We're all in the same boat. If it sinks, we all sink. But y'all let me know what you thought about it in the comment section below. Like, share, comment, and of course, hit that subscribe button before you go. And major kudos to that gentleman. Like I said, if anybody has his Instagram, drop it in the comment section. I applaud him. Absolutely. But peace and love. I'm out.